In this video, I'm going to be showing you a process in which we apply a heavy layer of Impasto white paint to our grisaille. We're going to be adding texture and building up physically some of the features that are closer to us in space. In this process, we're going to lose a lot of the nuanced information that we had developed in our grisaille, but we'll get that back on our glazing layers. To create this Impasto paint, I'm going to spread out some titanium white on several sheets of folded up newsprint. I'm going to spread it out about 1/8 of an inch thick and let it sit for a few days. The goal here is to let the paper suck out a majority of the oil so that the paint is thick and sticky. This will allow us to create texture and also build up really heavy applications of this paint, and it should dry in a reasonable amount of time. Luckily, I had a jar of really dried out old white paint. It was just about the right texture I needed, so that's what I ended up using for this demo. You can see that it's not super easy to spread around this paint, which I think is good. And the more that you work it, the more it'll loosen up a little bit. So as I began to apply it to the surface of the skull, I really wanted to create a separation of light and dark and avoid putting too much of this Impasto paint in areas where there is shadow. I'm also going to maintain the logic that there will be a thicker application on all the surfaces that are closer to me in space and thinner in all the surfaces that are farther away from me in space. So the back of the skull and the horns will end up having the thinnest amount of this paint. You can see here that I'm really being considerate about the kind of texture I'm making. If I make one gesture in the paint, I want to counteract it with another move, either coming from another direction or maybe patting it down a little bit. I think this helps cover up our tracks a little bit on how we made a mark, and the marks just end up being more idiosyncratic and interesting. When creating this texture, we need to be mindful of how our glazing layers will settle into the marks and valleys that we're leaving in this paint surface. You can see that I'm starting to deposit more and more paint towards the front of the skull and in the snout. I'm also building up significantly around the eye socket and the beginning of the nose cavity. I can begin to carve out some of the suture lines in the skull using the end of my brush. I'm also going to use the end of my brush to help define some of these sections within the snout. I've came back and really revisited a lot of this texture and got it to where I wanted it. I also sculpted out the front of the nose here in a way that I thought looked a little better. So now I'm going to let this dry. Hopefully it takes maybe a week, hopefully less, and then we'll start to glaze.